Mute original. Mute original audio. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, and the YouTube is just about to start. I'm just going to wait for it to kick in, and then we can have the first question. Okay, so the first question and the second question also actually, but the first question is from Sri Radha from Brighton.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, my humble obeisances, Raj. This is, I think it's a silly question, but it's a question I've often wondered about. What I've noticed is that animals come to devotees, and why they come, I'm wondering if this is their last journey before they move on. I mean, in my home, I've got a cat called Bolo, and I have Prabhupada chanting all the time. And when I stroke Bolo, he purrs away, but I chant Hare Krishna to him all the time. And my question is, I know it's silly, but my question is, do they come to devotees as sort of a moving on before they into maybe a human form? Is that why they come to devotees?
Tell you a brief story. One day at Audarya, I looked out the window and there was a peacock in the forest. And I thought, look, there's a peacock in the forest, you know. So I tried to follow him, and he went around the mountainside and so forth, and he just stayed near the top. And I called a couple of the devotees and said, look, there's a peacock out here. And then he came onto the property. Well, he was on the property at the time, but he came onto the developed areas, and he's been there for 15 years. He never goes anywhere. He's a brahmachari. So so you have to think about such animals in light of their previous lives and so forth. And so it is with all the devotees, animals, I would say. There are some famous animals in South India, famous elephants that involved with, or a famous elephant, I recall, involved with one of the Vishnu temples there. I forget all the details of that, but it's obvious that he's a devotee. There are some famous birds. Where's that place? Pakshi Tirtha must be. What is the story there? The birds come every year, 2 birds. My memory's not so good now these days. I can't recall, but anyway.
Paramananda is saying it's Guru Vair temple.
Guru Vair for the elephant, yeah. But there's Pakshi Tirtha, where there's 2 birds that come every year at a certain time. I forget the Leela for that, but it's, you know, connected to Vishnu and Vaishnavism and so forth. So anyway, there are many special instances of that, and and it said the cats and the dogs in the house of Srivastaka were liberated. It's mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So I think we should look at it in that way. Certainly, they've taken birth as animals or birds or for whatever reason, but they have a past that enables them to connect with devotees. Another example that comes to mind, of course, is the whole of India, if you will, which is its secular name. Bharat is its original name for that landmass, the subcontinent, after Maharaj Bharat, who left the world and entered the Himalayas as we began as a devotee, and pursued the solitude that the mountains provided, and the conducive nature that they provided for bhajan. But when he saw a deer crossing the river, chased by tiger and captured by the tiger, but giving birth, and the fawn was born motherless, then he naturally, out of compassion, took care of the fawn, but became distracted by the fawn, and of course fell to his death, preoccupied with the fawn. He took birth as a deer himself, but as a deer, deers have very good hearing, of course. So he positioned himself within the forest near enough that he could hear the recitation of the Bhagavatam by sages. This was Bharat Maharaj. So he knew that he was who he was and how he got there. He was able to remember from his previous life and so forth. And after that, of course, he became born as Jad Bharat, and so the story goes. So there are many nice examples of this.
Yeah.
So we should see that, that your cat will be born in a devotee, as a devotee, in human form, as a devotee in his or her next life.
I've never had to look for a cat. They've always been given to me. So it really sort of clicked on me once I came into Krishna consciousness, that they've been given by Krishna so that they can move on.
But this speaks to us about the efficacy, the power of bhakti. As I've often said and underscored, bhakti is governed by the nirguna, not by the tamaguna, rajaguna, or sattvaguna, or modes of nature, but by the transcendental atmosphere and influence of the Krishna's internal energy, whereas the material nature consists of the three gunas, tamas, rajas, and sattva. And so because bhakti is governed by that which is eternal, the results that we accrue, if you will, from practicing bhakti are also eternal. Now, they might not manifest all at once, but they're eternal. So, in other words, because of contact with bhakti, even in an animal life, then one will derive benefit. Or in a human life, in contact with bhakti, if one happens for one reason or another to take birth as an animal, or a bird or something, as some of these examples that we're giving, that bhakti stays with them. That wouldn't happen if they were close to hatha yoga or jnana yoga, or they were associated with other kind of sages, not themselves under the influence of bhakti. So there are many stories like this, many examples of this, and your question is not a silly question at all. And if we look carefully at it, we examine it, we have to come to this kind of conclusion that the power of bhakti is such that the results derived from associating, even in some instances unknowingly, with bhakti, are permanent, and they show up, and they may show up even in the less complex forms of life in the ways in which we're talking about, but are nonetheless obvious to those who pay attention to such animals and their lifestyles and affinity for devotional atmosphere, devotees, prasadam, and so on and so forth.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Hare Krishna.
Right.
There's a couple of nice comments in the chat. Chidahari says, the birds were said to have been there from the time of Sri Ram, the temple you mentioned. And then Kanaram says that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj says that even Sarvabhauma's dog is dear to Lord Chaitanya.
Right.
So the next question is from Amrit Gopal, also from Brighton.
Yes.
Hare Krishna, dear Vaishnavas, Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Kemanache.
Hello.
Okay.
Reading the fifth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a verse and purport that has intrigued me. I think partially because I work in an atmosphere that is comprised of very opulent, very materially opulent people. But just the verse, The sense enjoyment of the demigods is somewhat disturbed, but the residents of the planets, the subterranean heavenly planets, they enjoy life without disturbances. Thus, they are understood to be very attached to illusory happiness. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada calls these fools, vimudhas, because they are engaged in material happiness, because it's temporary. They're candidates for the mercy of the Vaishnavas. So my question is that why is it that the illusory energy causes a soul to forget? Why is opulence sometimes the cause of forgetfulness? And the second part of that question is, how can I constantly remember this? Because I'm finding that even subtly, sometimes I see the opulence of these materially engrossed people. Sometimes I think it must be because they were pious in their previous life and they're experiencing the fruits now. But their forgetfulness, of course, how is it that they've forgotten?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I think that as Gita Bhagavad Gita says, Bhoga Ishvarya Prasaktanam Teapri Chetasam Vyavasayatmika Buddhir Samadona Vidhiyate. Bhoga Ishvarya, Bhoga, enjoyment, Aishvarya, opulence, Bhoga Ishvarya Prasaktanam Teapri Chetasam Vyavasayatmika Buddhir Ekeha Kurunandana. Such material facilities, if you will, comforts and so forth, obviously they tend to absorb us in, make us feel more comfortable, relatively speaking, in our material bodies, mitigate the distress of the material body to some extent, right? And which, when it's not mitigated, it serves as considerable negative impetus for, finding a solution. They find the material opulence provides kind of a stopgap, temporary solution of sorts to the natural built-in negative impetus of material nature, which makes us feel out of place and uncomfortable and in search for something more than what meets the eye and the mind. So that kind of third eye, if you will, is going to close down by material opulences and comfort. So the Gita says, so those who are too much attached to enjoyment and Aishvarya, samadho na vidhiyate, they cannot attain, they don't have one-mindedness of focus that's required for attaining samadhi. So samadho na vidhiyate, they can't attain it. So there's two things being mentioned here. I mean, on the one hand, material opulence, bhoga aishvarya, and its pursuit, if you will, causes the intellect to be, in the language of the Gita, many-branched, or the mind. Just like modern society is really promoting, in many respects, the idea of material opulence being, the goal, right? If you have money, well, you're famous, right? And suddenly your opinion counts. And within the context of that material well-being, well, it's just endless. How many possibilities? If you want to pursue comfort through material well-being, well, there's no end to that, right? And this is the problem, today, largely, that there's just too many choices. There's just too many choices. It becomes disturbing to the mind, but and that's not conducive to the antithesis of that. I say the other side, the one-mindedness that's required for spiritual practice. So you can't. I think that you can't expect to have knowledge while pursuing ignorance. Some people say, why don't I remember my previous life? Well, you might be able to, but you're going about it in a way that is not possible, because we're pursuing, the antithesis of a spiritual life and underlying facts that I've had, many lives. Material life, we're born into ignorance. The very cause of our birth materially is not knowledge, it's ignorance. So how can you expect to have knowledge in the pursuit of ignorance? We can give you a theoretical and say, here's the theory. You're actually not this body. You had a previous life and a previous life and a previous life. So that's a theory, right? Now, why can't I remember it? Well, you can't remember it to the extent that you're pursuing the ignorance that repeated births arise out of. If you want to know, well, it's possible, and then you can, to begin with, you have to, so come to know the self. So know what the self is, and then you may know about your previous births, or you may think it's not that important. These are just passing, phases of that are superficial to what I am, and so forth. Just to go on that for a second, why don't you remember your previous lives? Well, I wasn't trying to. I'm trying to concentrate on this life, in bringing an end to repeated birth and death. If you go to these, whatever hypnotic regression systems sessions to find out what your previous birth is, you usually find that you were, an Egyptian king, or if you play it out, it doesn't make a lot of karmic sense if you were such and such, and how come you're, born, in Britain in this family, I thought you were a Danish king previously, so, and everybody was, or whatever. I'm generalizing, but not in doing so, not giving a lot of credence to such, pursuits. If you want to pursue what you were in your previous life, why don't you pursue first what you are, and the fact that you change lives. Anyway, so I'm speaking in a broader way, but I think it holds up. Yes, you can say that there was a piety in people's lives to have, if in this life, from the previous life to this life, they're experiencing material opulences and so forth. I was once visiting with Chaitanya Goswami of the Radharaman Goswamis, and we were talking about a fellow who was a classmate of his and had become a spiritual teacher in the West, and he had adopted bhakti at a certain point, and he was getting a following and so forth. But he asked Chaitanya Goswami to come with him to the West because he didn't really know Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And so he wanted Chaitanya Goswami, who was learned, to give classes and so forth. And Chaitanya Goswami chuckled and said, he doesn't have any, he's doing this because he finds, Hare Krishna is popular, so I'll be that, and he did his own version of Krishna consciousness, but he wasn't really grounded in, initiated in, the sampradaya and so forth. But the man was fabulously wealthy and had a lot of followers and so forth. So Chaitanya Goswami chuckled and said, yeah, he doesn't have any knowledge. And he has all this piety that's bringing him this attention, money and followers and so forth, and spending it all, in this life. What will the next life be? Was his query, appropriately so. So yeah, it's true that that's a little bit different because he was, some type of a sadhu, but people get material opulence and from what they've done in the past. So, why do they forget? Well, I've given, a broader example why we forget. What are you going to remember? Why do you forget at all your previous life? I've explained. So the same holds true for such people. And then you have to teach them that this is the teaching of the Veda. If you want material opulence, this is how you get it. But how you get it is the opposite. You have to be pious. You have to be self-sacrificing, and so on and so forth. And it's the fruit of that. So it would appear in the world today that that's not necessarily the case. That you can get material opulence by cheating other people. You can get ahead by stepping on the heads of others, and so on and so forth, which really does not result in it. The result that you're getting is actually due to your previous life. And because the way you're conducting yourself is such that will accrue the opposite well in the next life. So this is just a microcosm of what we say, how macrocosmically this works, that if you very piously conduct yourself with the goal of attaining Swarga, the celestial realm, well, that you can go there and live for eons, if you will. But then again, come down, right? Up and down. So in a microcosm of that, so people are doing that. And their heaven is, well, they may attain, a opulent situation in this world, but not understand where it comes from. We're there teaching theoretically and so forth, but it's hard to speak over the microphone of materialism and consumerism. Materialism as a philosophy, consumerism as a resultant way of life. That if your philosophy is that there's nothing more to life than whatever you want to make out of it, and then that's a recipe for doing whatever's necessary to get material opulence, basically. So, as I say, the consumerism is largely driven by an overriding materialistic philosophical perspective. That's the dominant, paradigm philosophically in the world. Even though most people aren't philosophical, nonetheless they're influenced by that and they conduct themselves accordingly. So I hope that helps. Okay, Hare Krishna. Another question?
I had a quick comment. It's interesting because you were saying, like, why don't people remember their past lives? It's because of ignorance and all that. So my nephew, actually, he's one of those kids.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so he's one of those kids who remembered his past life, but he has nothing to do with Krishna consciousness or spirituality. But he actively wanted to forget that he remembered it because it made him weird in the so-called normal. So even if you don't have the avidya covering your remembrance of your past life, the avidya tries to cover it even in this life, if you remember. And that was really interesting. And for me, it was like inconceivable that he didn't put it together, that if he remembers his past life, the person that he's right now is not his actual self. And he really, it was too much for him. So anyway, so the next question, the next question is from Krishna Chaitanya.
Hare Krishna.
We can hear you.
Oh, good. My question is about a thing in the Bhajan Rahasya, and it's that part. Maybe I'll just read your translation of the part and then ask the question. One should next become mature in one's worship on the basis of the first 4 verses of the Shikshashtakam before accepting one's spiritual body in the 5th verse. With this verse, one begins to take shelter of Srimati Radharani's lotus feet in the siddha-deha and then make gradual progress. By the time one has reached the 6th verse, one's contaminations have pretty much disappeared, and one therefore has the right to worship in one's siddha-deha. If anyone tries to meditate on his spiritual body without having this qualification, his intelligence will be turned upside down due to his lack of strength. So my question about this is, what are some examples of trying to meditate on the spiritual body without having the qualification? And what are some things that could happen to someone who tries to do so? And let's say, okay, that happened and someone figures that out, then what's the course that one should take to take care of that.
Uh-huh. Well, I think that one of the things that I really appreciated amongst the Himalayan yogis, sadhus and so forth, is that when asked philosophical questions, their answers were what I would call philosophically very basic, very, very basic. Like, you can't stay forever. Everything's temporary. Um, 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 you know, the Atma is different from the body. Happiness lies in the Atma, not in the body. The body is changing. I mean, these are very basic. They're not complicated. They are for the ordinary person, but for persons who have been involved in, for example, Gaudiya Vaishnavism for years, these are just real basic truths. But the emphasis on practice and putting into practice these basic tenets is so laudable, so correct, if you will, and so powerful, that the fact of the matter is that many theological arguments, which are very interesting, stimulating in a way, have no they don't have the power to do what giving oneself and one's energy to these basic practices can do for you. And so, when you would get answers from Prabhupada sometimes, when you ask a more complex theological question about, let's say, the nature of the spiritual world, he might say something like, why don't you, go there and find out? I've told you how to go there and find out for yourself and experience it. Why don't you experience? How much can I put that into words? And if I do, that makes the implication would be that may satisfy your intellect for some time and so forth. But the intellect hasn't quite an appetite of its own, and we have to tame it, and we have to feed the soul, not the intellect. We have to again use our head, as I often say, to soften our hearts by applying ourselves in practice. So to give all of your energy to like a Himalayan yoga that let's say, for example, I'm not the body, and then try to put that into practice. That's hugely powerful, and affording of experiential spirituality, way more than studying a book and learning, whether Krishna is compassionate to the conditioned souls, or he's only compassionate, for example, through the devotees who are the extension of himself because they have experience of suffering. He doesn't have experience of suffering because that would mean he was in ignorance. Therefore, because he doesn't have experience, he doesn't have the empathy. His compassion is only reserved for the devotees who are within the influence of the Swarup Shakti. This is a complicated theological argument that's interesting and so forth. But applying yourself to that, it's useful to a point only. And what we find, to get to your question, in the Bhaktivinoda Paribar, with you were quoting there Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhajan Rahasya, and which is kind of a commentary on Shikshastakam. He has his own commentary on Shikshastakam, but the Bhajan Rahasya is another one. And there we find this, and we find further that emphasis of Bhakti Vinod to a greater extent by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who wouldn't even let his disciples read certain books, wouldn't let them read Ujjval Nilamani. He restricted them from reading sections of Chaitanya Charitamrita like Antya Leela. They couldn't read. Their main focus with regard to Chaitanya Leela was Chaitanya Bhagavat. And this was not deny them of, participation, but to help facilitate their experiential participation in spiritual life by emphasis on, the basic practices, if you will. So this is a characteristic of our paribar. Now, some people, the members of our paribar, disciples of Prabhupada, even hearing about things that Prabhupada was not teaching or emphasizing, the siddha-deha, for example, and so forth, were intimidated to think that, I didn't get a siddha-deha. Guru was supposed to give me the siddha-deha, according to, somebody I just met. And he's giving me all these precedences from the Sampradaya and the history. And this is how you get the Rag Bhakti, and you have to get the siddha-deha, and you have to serve in the siddha-deha in meditation, along with your sadhaka-deha. And, you didn't get that. So, you're not getting everything. And neither, for that matter, are you in an unbroken Guru Parampara. I mean, Bhaktisiddhanta, where's his Diksha Patra, his letter that says he was initiated by Gaur Kishore, which has a list of the different gurus, in the succession and what their siddha-deha is. So they heard these kind of things and they were intimidated by that, to think that they were missing out on something. There was something lacking. One of the things that repeatedly that the Himalayan yogis will say is, if you ask them what's the most important thing, and they would say, the mantra given by my guru. That's everything. It's like, duh, I mean, everything's in the mantra. Gopal mantra is revealed in the Gopal Tapani, that Shruti, that text that sheds light on Gopal, and the means that the reality about him will come to light is through the utterance of meditation on the mantra received from the Guru, the Gopal mantra. Brahma received the Gopal mantra as described in Gopal Tapani, as described in Brahma Samhita, and he realized Krishna. And of course, then there's the Hare Krishna Nam mantra as well that we receive. So all the entire wealth of the whole spiritual world is within the mantra and within the name. Within the name is the Leela, the Parshads, all the associates of Krishna, his form, his rupa, his guna, his Leela, and so forth. So the emphasis of Bhakti Vinod and Bhakti Siddhanta, more so even, taking the lead from Bhakti Vinod Thakur, was on Nam Sankirtan, and mantra dhyan also. He gave mantras, he gave diksha, and so forth. And there's this any number of examples that you could cite. Gopal Kumar is an example of Sanatana Goswami. He had his mantra. His mantra gave him mantra and Nam. In the end, the efficacy of the mantra was reached, and then through Harinam, he entered into Smaranam in conjunction with Harinam, rising out of Harinam, and he attained Goloka. So there are so many examples of this. Now, and so Bhakti Vinod Thakur, his emphasis, and appropriately so, was, well, we should practice, but we have to practice relative to our adhikar. So some practices, we may not, within the context of Rag Bhakti, we may not have adhikar for and have eligibility for. And so until the eligibility comes, then we should conduct ourselves otherwise. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is probably the best example. He did Nam Sankirtan, he did preaching widely, and as a result of that, he was drawn into this meditative life that we find in the Antya-lila, internal life, where he could no longer be a public person. He wasn't capable of being a public person anymore because of how he conducted himself in the public sphere. So without having conducted oneself in that way, to try to enter into the meditative life and example of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Antya-lila would be really to skip over everything that's taught in the Madhya-lila, if properly understood. He is, after all, Krishna in his Acharya Leela. So he's teaching. Achar means example, a character, teaching by his example. How did he conduct himself? These teachings weren't absent about Raga Bhakti as he spoke with Rupa and Sanatan, and converted Sarvabhauma and so forth. The teachings were there, but how he was applying them. He was giving the teaching, sharing the teachings, and conducting himself, as I say, in the public sphere in such a way that the way he conducted himself drew him. And then he had adhikar to, for that kind of pursuit. Bhaktivinoda's very kind of simple logic is that, well, if you want to meditate on the siddha-deha, you need to have a taste for that, because if it's not driven by a taste, you won't be able to keep it up. It may be interesting, stimulating, intellectually, exciting. Wow, I'm getting something this is it now. Now I'm getting it, But that may then obscure the fact that you've got something that you're not using. Your sadhaka-deha, and applying it in such a way that it will result in the natural arising of a siddha-deha and the meditation upon it and so forth. So in our paribar, then we want to give a theoretical understanding of this, but emphasize the practices by which this can come about. Our gurus don't come and give us a siddha-deha and say, here's your siddha-deha, and by the way, this is your guru's siddha-deha, and his siddha-deha, and his gurus. Now you meditate on that and give you some kind of mental map, of Vrindavan, what's happening at different times, and this should be your sadhana. There are people that do that, excuse me, it is it's by and large, or to a large extent, my experience is it's not resulting in that which it's supposed to result in, and often results in something that is undesirable. So that was experienced by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Many people were giving siddha-deha and saying that, you have to get from me, I'm from the Nityananda Vamsa or the Advaita Vamsa, and then those gurus would be supported by the disciples and so forth. And over times their character was not good. Gaudiya Vaishnavism was not something at the time of Bhaktivinoda that pious Hindus were giving much attention to, because of the abuse in the name of prem and lila smaranam, which are very attractive ideas and so forth. And there was a lot of immorality in the name of, parakiya bhajan, actual material parakiya was going on in some places. So they were seeing this, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So they sought to make an adjustment in their focus that we could get extraordinary results, like my Guru Maharaj, who had the power of Nityananda Prabhu to go all over the world. I heard somebody the other day, he's some Babaji guy, and he said, fellow from Nityananda Vamsa, he said, well, I was reading it, something someone had sent me, that, he said that, yes, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu predicted that the holy name will go to every town and village, and that was done, I think, around 1965, someone did that. But now Raga Bhakti, now that has not been given. That must be given. As if, and the implication was that was going to happen now through me. I'm going to do that. I had to laugh. First of all, to just say somebody did that in 1965. What it did, what kind of self-sacrifice Prabhupada embodied to bring that about. What kind of Vaishnava he was, that hundreds of people in countries that he never went to would chant Hare Krishna, just knowing about him, and start a temple. through the influence of his other disciples that went there and so forth. I mean, it's super extraordinary in what he did, what kind of shakti he had to make that happen, to fulfill that prophecy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and to think that, oh yeah, somebody did that in 1965. What did they do? What kind of power did that take? Krishna Shakti Vinenai. Tar Pravartana. Vinena, without Krishna Shakti, no one can effectively, Chaitanya Charitamrita says, spread Sankirtan, the Sankirtan of the holy name. So what is that Shakti? So it's kind of silly. So we see practically that in the name of, well, following Rupa Goswami or Haridas Thakur, bhajan. This is what it's really about. Bhajan. Live on the bank of Radhakund, establish yourself there with a little hut or no hut and chant Hare Krishna. And this is right there. That's the essence of all the teachings. So we should all run over there and so forth. Well, there's 11 or so teachings in that book, Upadesha Amrita, and if you study it carefully, you see there's a progression that's going on there. Yeah. So just the jump there has often resulted in giving Gaudiya Vaishnavism a bad name. It has resulted in cheapening this ideal. Some of the Godbrothers that I mentioned who left Prabhupada for this kind of ideal. The ones that I know mostly some of them became scholars. Prabhupada told Nitai's disciple Nitai, first become devotee, then become scholar. And he said, why not become scholar and devotee at the same time? Well, he's an example because he became a scholar and he didn't become a devotee. He's like not a practicing devotee. Hasn't been for who knows how long. He may come back around to it. He has some identification with it and so forth. But Prabhupada's instruction to him was very pertinent, and he thought he could dismiss that. There are others too. So you have Jagadananda, Pandu, and what was his name? Hiranyagarbha, Pandu, and Nadia, three disciples of Prabhupada, all left Prabhupada's mission and become followers of Lalit Prasad. And Nadia is nowhere to be found. Pandu's become a Gauranagar Bhav follower, among other things, which is something that Bhaktivinoda himself dismissed. And Hiranyagarbha, well, he became influenced by the Sahajya Vaishnavas, so-called. Then he ended up in university, become a scholar. Many years later, he had opportunity to read a manuscript of my Bhavanubhada and Tattva Sandarbha, and he contacted me and we got together, and I was somewhat helpful in getting him back involved in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. But the original idea that I believe that he was and others were drawn by was like, wow, there's something missing here, and we're going to get it here, and it's going to be, very quickly this is going to happen. But it doesn't happen so quickly. So there are any number of examples of that. I mean, what you find nowadays is people leave the Paribar of Bhaktivinoda largely due to what the ISKCON is in that Paribar, whether they use that term or not, and they're their largest group, and they've had some problems with spiritual authority, kind of commanding the faith of others and compelling them. And so, some people have left. gone to these other sectors where the siddha-deha is given, and without that kind of adhikar that we're talking about. Sorry, and then they become the best disciples of that guru who nobody knew about previously, and now they want to take him to the West and take them of his words and print them in English. It's all coming from the power of the residue of the Bhakti Vinod Paribar, where we have some Shakti to do something for Krishna consciousness in the world, which if one applies oneself, it should result in. Now you can misapply yourself in the name of preaching too, and that there's plenty of examples of that. So there has to be a corrective, to that side. But anyway, all things in time and with eligibility. Hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, the last question it's all the way from Minneapolis. It's from Parmanand.
Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Is this my obeisances? Are you able to hear me?
Can't hear you, can see you. You look very effulgent.
Parmanand, if you do the English, if you click on at the bottom, it says, I think it says interpretation or English or something like that. If you choose English there, it should be okay.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Please accept my obeisances. So my question is in relation to what I've read in second canto, 9th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam. There we see Lord Brahma is surrendering to the Lord's instruction. And when Lord Brahma is telling Narada, he says that he's instructing Narada on this, what he heard from the Lord, because of Narada's submission to him. And we see this is emphasized by Srila Prabhupada, that when we approach the Guru, surrender has to be there. So my question is, what is being surrendered? Because we can see that sometimes we can say that, oh, Guru Maharaj is a liberal or a conservative, therefore I'll follow whatever Guru Maharaj says. That doesn't seem exactly correct, at least in my own thinking so far. But at the same time, Guru Maharaj might also give us instructions on what are practical things that we can do that to make progress in spiritual life. So that surrender also has to be there. So that's my question, Maharaj. What is actually being surrendered when we approach
Right. Right. Thank you for your question. Well, we've spoken about this at length, and it's worth repeating many times over. What gives one eligibility to tread the path of bhakti is shraddha. So that means faith in the efficacy of bhakti. And we need faith to traverse any path. We need to believe that there's going to be a result, the desired result, in order to have the energy to take up the task. But with regard to other spiritual paths like dhyan and yoga, you need more than faith. There's other things that you need. Now within bhakti, all you need is faith. And as you apply yourself in bhakti, you become more qualified to, as we were saying earlier, to adapt other practices in bhakti. You can't necessarily apply yourself to all of them. You can't, for example, very effectively meditate unless the chitta is cleansed and you become free from material desires, because they'll just distract you. Your mind will be focused on them, right? So it's very practical. So faith is the eligibility, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur very wisely has said that faith means faith in the scriptural argument. That's true, but that's not the whole definition of faith. The whole definition of faith is sharanagati, is the application of oneself in relation to the spiritual argument. Hmm? So the scriptural argument, the scriptural argument is there. What the Sambandha Gyan? What are you? What is matter? Who is Bhagwan? So on and so forth. So faith that if I want to arrive at perfect knowing, I have to have a perfect method. My instruments are imperfect. They're acquired as a result of functioning in ignorance. They're imperfect. That doesn't mean they don't perfectly work in some respects, but in terms of giving comprehensive knowledge, they're imperfect. So with my eyes, I can see perfectly, well, it's 20/20 vision that in front of me, that this is the letter K for Krishna. It's objective, but as far as the totality of my material instruments, mind, senses, intellect, and so forth, no matter how I apply myself with them, I can't arrive at perfect knowledge with them. So the perfect method is to see that understand that the world, reality is bigger than me. I'm a part of reality. Reality must reveal itself to me. So if God wants me to know, I can know. If the infinite wants to reveal itself to the finite, well, it has infinite capacity to do so. Thus, the finite can do what it could not do on its own. So this is just the basic math, if you will, of revelation. Our argument for the need for revelation to arrive at comprehensive knowing. We've seen for as long as human existence has been around, people have been trying to arrive at perfect knowledge by which they can become perfectly happy. And the only people that we could remotely, the only people that we could consider, maybe they have perfect happiness, perfect knowledge because they have perfect happiness, would be the few and far between sages and rishis who are satisfied with nothing, right? I mean, they do stand out if we look at carefully. If we and speak to us that that they're deriving fulfillment in a way that exceeds all of the efforts to arrive at fulfillment and happiness, and the knowledge that requires, the knowledge and the consequent action that follows, put together. You put all that together, these people are happier. So now you may want to ignore them because, well, who can do that, or they're weird, or we can't understand their happiness. There must be some problem in their brain that they don't need to eat as much or whatever. And they can sit for long periods of time. But their own testimony speaks loudly to us, and this testimony is cross-cultural. So you can find it in his Catholic saints, you can find it in the Sufis, you can find it in the Hindus, you can find it in the Buddhists, and so forth. They're tapping into the perennial, if you will, philosophy experientially and reporting on it in a basic way. They concur. Now, details of their experience they may differ on relative to the path they've taken, to enter into that experience. So we have faith that there is perfect knowledge, and we seek it through a perfect method, and this is the perfect method, to fold our hands, right? In Sharanagati, in surrender. We give up. We're not trying anymore the other way on the strength of our material faculties, but we're inverse. We're going the opposite way. We're using our material faculties to go within. And so wisely, as I say, Bhaktivinoda said that faith is defined by some as faith in the scriptural argument, and that's true, but it's not the whole story, because the whole story is applying the scriptural argument. And now we get to the basics, right? What we were talking about earlier, basic application. And so and that, he said, is called Sharanagati. That is called Sharanagati. Now, Sharanagati is itself a limb of bhakti, according to Rupa Goswami, but Bhaktivinoda Thakur has emphasized this particular limb, and appropriately so. We find it's prominent in the Ramanuja Sampradaya for people who have no other qualification. They could do Sharanagati. So they're not qualified by karma or by gyan. They can do Sharanagati. So it's sixfold. Anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya vardhanam pakshikshati vishvaspa gopritve varanam tata atmanikshepa karpanye sadvidha Sharanagati. So it's sixfold. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur has written songs, several songs for each limb of Sharanagati that one can sing, learn, and in that long for, pine for, aspire for that limb of Sharanagati to become part of my very life. And so the culture is a culture of Sharanagati. But it begins in one sense by accepting what's favorable for bhakti, rejecting what's unfavorable for bhakti. So its core is said to be that Krishna is my protector, Krishna is my maintainer. So to put these things into practice, practically that will be done differently for a monk than for a householder. But the process will be the same, but the way it will go about it will be slightly different. A householder needs some income for the family, and so on and so forth, and then he or she has extra, what do they call it, disposable income. They should dispose of it. Throw it. The yogis will tell you, throw your money in the Ganga. We'll say, throw it at, in Vaishnav Seva, and some Vaishnav may, pick it up and use it for Krishna. Good for you. So again, a householder or a person earning will apply themselves slightly differently, but the principle is the same. The monk needs to maintain himself too. He needs, some donations or get up and travel and pick up the fruits that have fallen from the trees and the roots in the ground, and he has to make some effort, right? So the householder has to make effort. It will differently have a means of livelihood for the husband and wife to provide for the children and so forth. Anyway, so on. But the principle is the same. So we should study Sharanagati and try to apply ourselves to what it means to surrender. And this is what the Guru is teaching. The Guru is teaching. He's giving faith, sharing his experience, which is contagious. So we catch it and we have the faith in Krishna Bhakti through that medium through which we have ourselves, been in touch, and the contagious effect has captured our faith. And so we see the example of the Guru. So then that applies to Sharanagati. We have to try to conduct ourselves, relative to our adhikar, similarly, and so on. So, and of course, if you get specific instructions from the Guru, then that's another thing. Then that's okay. Then they should do that. Prabhupada used to say, practically his whole life, his whole success was based on just following the orders of his Guru to print, books in English. He took like a suggestion from Bhaktisiddhanta and called it an order. That was his one-mindedness to do that. He tried to go to English-speaking countries. Ultimately, he got passage to America, and his focus was on writing his books and printing them. And we were very much involved in helping him circulate the books and so forth. And we'll move and grew out of that. So, if the guru has a mission, like we have a mission, we have a sangha and so forth, there are things that that I would like to do, for example, for the members, and they require members' participation. And Gurnish is now helping me to engage other devotees and things we'd like to do, and it requires funding and so forth for those who are not living, in an ashram. So this is kind of a practical way of speaking about it. Guru has his own or her own disposition, as you mentioned. Could have some conservative perspectives. Could have some. I've got both liberal perspectives that I identify with, and conservative perspectives that I identify with. I'm not a bigoted person, and there are neither am I a flaky person. So there could be extremes on either side, right? That to the point of absurdity, just demonstrating that these worldly perspectives have their limitations. Well, we should, leave the world. There was a time, just as an aside, in the United States where the Christian right, if you will, politically speaking, is a big voting bloc and influence. There was a time when they were not involved in politics at all. It was not there something for them to be involved in. I think that would have been, better for them spiritually, and similarly for devotees. Now, some devotees, it depends how. I mean, this is an empty mark. We're leaving the world now. Everybody is not as qualified to leave to the same extent. So, to that extent, they're going to be plugged into the world, and then relative considerations may loom larger for some than others. And there may be times in the world where it looms large for all of us, its conditions, and we have to pay attention to it. Like if there's a nuclear war, we might have to pay attention to it. How could we avoid it, and so forth? But for the most part, we know it's going to go on, and even if it blows up, it's going to go on, and it's the same thing going on over and over again. It's the transformation of the modes of nature. Our concern is with another world, and we have the capacity to be a member of that world. It starts with understanding the Atma as Nitya Krishna Das and applying ourselves accordingly. So, Sharanagati is the term for surrender, and it has a concise definition. It may extend, as I say, to apply to whoever gives you instruction. Then, personally, you should feel blessed by that. Try to take that seriously. It's also possible the Guru may give us an instruction, and we may say that is a good instruction. This is the problem with applying myself to it, given my circumstance. Then he may reconsider and adjust and so forth. But my instruction to all of you, if you're not living in the ashram, is to help the projects, is to do your sadhana. Try to apply yourself as a Sharanagata to the practices of bhakti, and to help the sangha practically. If there's ways that you can be engaged with your energy or financially, then it will grow. It should be your project. It's for you. It's your project. So make it wonderful. That should be your fun to do that. Does that help?
Yes, Maharaj. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Very, very nice to hear your voice. I think that's the first time I've heard your voice.
Yes, it is.
You have a nice voice, and I see you have a nice library behind you.
Yeah, it's a collection of books. Like I said, I collect the books,
Right.
but I don't necessarily read.
Okay. Haribol. So that's about all the time we have, I think, for today. Appreciate the questions, and I hope to be with you all next week. Gaur Premanande.
Haribo. Srila Guru Maharaj ki jai. Just a quick announcement to everybody. This coming Thursday, Muralidhar is going to be giving a class on Madhurya Kadambini on this same channel here. And Guru Maharaj mentioned being engaged in the Sangha and everything. So I'm working on a bunch of stuff that people can plug into. But I'm not going to share any details at this point, but I'm just giving a little plug that there are opportunities coming your way if you're interested. So I'll keep you guys posted, and once the plans are better formed, I'm gonna announce it here. Until then, I guess I'll see you guys next week.